Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to UAP Studies Podcast. We are joined by Dr. Michael Glosson and Katie Page. How are you guys doing today?
Doing fantastic, man.
Doing great.
About this
We got a heck of an interview today, too, guys. We got Vinnie Adams, who's joining us from Disclosure Team. He's 8 hours different than where I'm at, and we're all already staggered on our time zones as well, so that should be fun. But Vinnie is somebody that when he started, I wasn't in competition with him, but I was looking at his progress, and he progressed so fast out of nowhere. And it was a bit of jealousy at first. I shouldn't have been, because I'm trying not to be that person. But just seeing all the lineup of guests that he had, it was amazing. And I actually grown to love the man, because I would listen to his podcast, and the way he talks, the way he asks his questions, it's reminiscent of what we're trying to do on UAP Studies Podcast. But he's been doing it, and he's been knocking it out of the park. I'm super proud to have him on. But before we get going, you guys have been active, as you always are. Michael, you got a new episode coming out on the Anomalous Review. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's with Larry Hancock. He's a historian of the UAP subject, but also national security. So I have a pretty long and fascinating conversation with him about why we've turned UAP into pretty much purely a national security and military issue, as opposed to all the other things that we might think about it, religion or spirituality or science or whatever. So, look for that. It'll be dropping in a few days on YouTube.
And that's something maybe that we in the community have not covered very much, is why do we militarize this so much? We wait for the military to give us the answers, as opposed to different aspects. That's a great interview. Yeah. And Katie, Rocky Mountain Ranch has another episode coming out as well. This is part number 3 of the Skinwalker behind the scenes.
That's right. Michael, that sounds like an interesting interview too. I have to check that out, because I agree. Like, follow the money, follow the power, but there's so much more to it. So I can't wait to watch that. But yeah, so I just put on Rocky Mountain Ranch Research with Katie Page, part 3 and the final episode of behind the scenes from season 1 of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And I got my first kind of nasty negative comment. So as a human, I'm dealing with
that's
that.
how you know you made it, Katie.
It in the world, you're getting the like.
That's how you know you're getting somewhere.
Somebody called me garbage. That's harsh.
Yeah, I love the trolls. I love the trolls. I don't know if you guys ever look at the comments in YouTube, but I like making them. Yeah, I like making them look stupid.
And silly me, I'm like, why do you think that? I want to have a conversation with this person, but I probably should learn the lesson and leave it alone and not respond. But anyway, so that's out there.
Just remember that person sitting on his toilet, taking a dump, and has nothing else better to do than just type away, "You're stupid."
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this guest, though, Vinny. I love when we have podcast hosts on, because they talk to so many people, and he's had such a successful podcast so I've always loved to hear their perspective and where they are and where their thoughts are. So I'm looking forward to this one. Plus, he has a great name, Vinny. I have my second oldest son is Vincent. So
sounds tough, doesn't it, though? Vinny Adams. Don't mess with Vinny Adams, right? Yeah, he sounds Italian. He might be Italian, but he's British. He's in the UK, of course. So without further ado, guys, let's get into our conversation with Vinnie Adams. And again, I have to say this, like and subscribe, because if you haven't doing that, well, not only you're missing out, but you're insulting Michael. Michael's mad if you don't. Personally, he will take it personal if you don't. Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of sleep over that. So
there's a lot of oversleep. And just nights of rage. Guys, thank you so much. Let's get this thing started. Well, I'm excited about this episode. As I mentioned, Vinnie Adams from Disclosure Team is joining us. And right now, all 4 of us have different time zones. It's morning for me, afternoon for Katie and Michael, and evening for Vinnie Adams as well. So it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. It's kind of a joke of was it Jim Carrey? Was it the Truman Show?
Right.
Yeah. He says something similar to
Like
that.
signing
Okay.
off or whatever.
Yeah. I just didn't deliver it as funny as he does, of course. Uh, what is awesome about Vinny is Vinny started roughly about the same time as I did. And he had the advantage because of his beautiful British accent. You know what I mean? And when he talks, it's like ASMR. So I love listening to his podcast because whenever he asks a question, he's like, he's got a really great voice. He's meant to do podcasting. But along with Ross Coulthart, which has an amazing, soothing Australian accent, in the mix, I have this French Canadian, talking about UFOs. It's not as glamorous. But Vinny, seriously, awesome to have you on, brother.
Oh, it's so good to see you guys. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
You've been knocking it out of the park with your interviews. And I think pretty much from the get-go, in the beginning, I was extremely jealous of your podcast. I'm like, how is he getting these names? Like just, somebody who starts out of the gate and gets these names right away. But then I fell in love with your podcast, your platform, the way that you think, the way you ask questions. It's honest. And I think people discover that they sign up to your show right away because that's what we look for. We look for authenticity in researchers and experiencers alike. So having you on, we had you on previously a couple of years ago, but it was rough. I wasn't as good as a host back then. Hopefully I've improved a bit, but we're going to fire some random questions at you because that's normally what we do. I was thinking, Michael, you could take the lead. Katie, you follow next, and I'll be the third in line.
Sure. So first, welcome to the show. I am the newcomer of the three of us on this show to the UFO topic, at least. I'm only about 5 years in, so I'm still like getting my sense of the landscape of who's who and what the ideas are and everything. And probably we have some listeners who are in the same position. So can you just give us like the rundown of what your show is and what you're doing? I know you've got a lot of affiliations and you've got a lot of conversations going on. So like, what's your deal?
I suppose I started the podcast. I was peer pressured into it, to be honest, because, when the pandemic hit and we were kind of in the middle of that is when I first kind of came forward publicly as someone in this subject. I started off on Instagram. I was putting posts out on things that I found interesting and credible. And it kind of took off really, really well. But prior to that, I'd been a researcher for about 10 years, just privately, just looking into the subject. But then I had a few people that I began making friends, and they were like, you should do a podcast. And I was just like, oh man, I really don't like being in front of the camera or even talking that much. But, lo and behold, I did it. But what I wanted the angle that I wanted to come at is, I'm British and us Brits like to go to the pub and sit around a table and drink beer and have a good conversation. So, the way that I ask my questions, I try and get the information and the questions asked on the current topics, but also I always like to try and make it as best I can into a bit more of a conversation as well. And I also want my guests to speak more than me. That's something because, people tune in for the guests. So it's kind of a balance of all those things. And I look back to 2021 when I started now and I cringe, and I like to think I've grown since then.
I'm sure you have. What was it like to decide to become a UFO person publicly? That's something I've struggled with. I don't want to tell people when I'm on a plane that like, oh, I work on UFOs. So that had to be kind of a hump for you too, starting a project and kind of getting on Instagram with it and stuff. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a learning curve. How what do I tell people? How much detail do I go into? Do I keep it vague? Or I've learned over time just to admit that's what I do. If people, 9 times out of 10, people are genuinely intrigued and they have a million questions. So I've got used to it. I really have. I never imagined I'd be, anybody in the subject at all. I still don't consider myself. I get, imposter syndrome all the time. But I just focus on what I do and go from there. It's a strange subject, because one reason why I called the whole project Disclosure Team is because the team is everyone that follows, everyone that subscribes. We're all the same. I'm just so happen to have put my face out there, but anyone can do it, So, yeah.
I love it.
Well, thank you for being here. It's very nice to meet you. And
You too.
one thing I love about your show is how well-rounded it is. And you have guests that come on from kind of the um, different, I guess, theories on what's going on with the UAP phenomenon. I watched just last night just to kind of, get to know you guys a little bit better through your podcast. You had Tyler Henry on, who I'm a big fan of, with Gary Nolan. So I watched that episode, and your co-host Katie. So of course I'm like, another Katie, she's awesome. So I love that. But I'm going to kind of rewind and go back a little bit. What sparked your interest 10 years ago when you started delving into the subject? Why did you do that? Did you have an experience yourself, or, what opened that door for you?
No, it wasn't due to an experience. I think it actually goes way back into my childhood. I was a child of the 80s, and we were inundated back then with a plethora of amazing science fiction movies and TV shows and things like that. And that, as a kid, I loved Star Wars and everything like that. So it almost sparked my imagination as to, what is out there, and asking the sort of bigger questions. And that kind of carried through my life, even in high school and in my 20s when I was living my life and stuff like that. It was always in the back of my mind. And, other kind of areas of what you might call fringe subjects began creeping up in my late 20s that I was looking into, ancient civilizations and astronomy. I was big into astronomy when I hit about 30. I did a course in astronomy and astrophysics, like a short course, and it just kept growing from there. So no real sighting. I almost feel, I mean, I have had one thing since in the last few years, but it never came from anything like that.
So did you come in kind of more of a skeptic then?
Not so much a skeptic, no, because I started in about 2010, I think it was. I started looking at declassified documents. The UK Ministry of Defence over 3 years had released a big tranche of UFO documents. And so I started accessing them and looking into them. Then I started with onto the US stuff, all the FBI files, everything. And for a good 10 years, I would spend an awful lot of time late at night just in front of my computer, just trying to just look into it and correlate different things. And it became almost an addiction. It was just, I couldn't stop. And I kind of haven't stopped since.
Boy, do we know that feeling, right? All of us here.
There should be like a rehab group of people recovering from selling UAPs. So my name is Vinnie. It's been exactly 2 hours since I've looked up anything UAP related.
UAP Twitter or whatever.
You get a sponsor and everything. Like, I'm tempted to go on X. Don't do it. Yeah, I think, being a child from the 80s myself, I think it's underrated how much Spielberg actually changed with Hollywood, the view of aliens, abductions, or just the possibility. And Star Wars, obviously, everything came out. And I think we got really lucky with the point in time in which we were born, because these amazing movies at such a young age fascinated us. And we grew up with images of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Can I just say, I just watched that movie for the first time, like this year.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
And what did you think?
It's incredible. It
right?
holds up as well as any piece of sci-fi I've ever seen. And I'm so sad that I didn't see it way earlier in my life. But now that I know how like well researched it was, like when I watched it now and I understand, like, he put a lot of real work into that film, and it's very thoughtful and beautifully done. And a lot of the scenes are really good illustrations of what actually happens in these encounters that people report. It's fantastic.
Well, if you pay attention too, there's a part where they walk by boxes and it says Lockheed Martin on it. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but it says specifically Lockheed Martin on it. I'm like, holy crap. That's a detail that I overlooked for years. But what really inspired me for that movie, being a French Canadian kid learning to speak French, in that movie, the main investigator was a French person that I later found out it was Jacques Vallée inspired. And I was like, oh my God. So Jacques Vallée became, to me at an early age, like an icon, because he was the only French person that I knew that was investigating UFOs that was world famous. So that's why I've always had a soft spot for Jacques, just because like he was such an inspiration to me. And his humbleness is like, when you read his book, you realize he's so humble. And Change Your Mind, don't have, I still can't get the modesty that he has. I still don't have that. I still will jump to conclusions, and there's fake videos. I'm like, oh my God, that's it. That's the one. He doesn't do that. And I think that's pretty cool. So Vinny, going back to your interview before my spiel on the whole movie thing.
The sci-fi history of UAPs.
Yeah, well, exactly. I love that movie. But
gotta
if you
look
haven't
for
seen
the number-
Contact, do it.
Look for the number 33 in that movie too. All throughout that movie, you'll see 33 everywhere. I'm like, there's little clues if you pay attention.
Well, it was way ahead of its time, right? That Bob Lazar hadn't even come out at that point, and yet this movie nailed a lot of stuff. Even the missing pilots, they come out at the end, and it's just there's so much to that movie that it's just phenomenal. But actually, on your side of the border, Vinny, in the UK, being it's not a huge country, so much history in lore in ufology, and I thought maybe you could just catch us up. I'm in Canada, Katie and Michael are in the US, so learning more about your neck of the woods and what's going on there, we'd love to hear that about the UK.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the UK is really stuck at the moment. It has been for a while. Like I mentioned earlier, they released a tranche of UFO files back. So I think it was like 3 consecutive years, 2007, 8, and 9, I think it was. And prior to that, the Ministry of Defense were a bit more open about talking about the subject. But after that, it just went completely dark. And now when you try and get any information or FOIA requests, you don't get anything. You get boilerplate responses that they're not looking into it. They don't, that they take air safety seriously, but nothing to do with UFOs or extraterrestrial life. So historically, going back decades, again, lots of information, lots of incredible cases, very detailed. You go back as far as Blue Book. You look at a lot of the US files on Blue Book, you can cross-correlate them with a lot of the files here in the UK. And it paints a really big picture of some of the cases that may not be as popular as some of the big ones we know from time ago. So that's something that I find good about the UK. But unfortunately, we're still stuck in that stigma. Kind of, it's perpetuated by the tabloids, and we're really struggling to break it into the mainstream, like it has done in the last 5 to 7 years in the US.
Do you think that it's like mostly laziness or lack of interest or secrecy that makes the UK situation what it is? You say like you send out a FOIA request and you don't really get anything. Is there nobody working on it, or do they not care, or are they being more tight-lipped than other countries maybe?
I think there's probably a little bit of everything in there. They're certainly being tight-lipped, and I find it very hard to believe that there is no one looking into it, because we know historically that we had different levels of organizations and groups within the Ministry of Defense looking at it. You look at Nick Pope, he was the desk clerk at the SecAS office, and then above him you had Defense Intelligence, DI-55 with a department that had the sort of the classified stuff. And I've spoken to sources from DI-55 over the years, and they've said, look, the department will still be running. It just would have changed names numerous times over the years, and so even ex-employees of that group are like, yeah, it's got to be somewhere. They just they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to let anybody know about it. So I think that's where we're at with it right now.
Nice. Do you think, sorry, my follow-up question, Michael, I'll shoot it back off to you after this. But in Canada, everything gets handed over to the States. So if we have anything UAP related, it's the States that takes care of it. But it seems like in the UK, it's a very similar situation. I mean, we look at the Rendlesham Forest incident. That was, a mixture of some UK guards, but mostly American guards. Over the American installation, they're starting to see drones. So do you think the UK sort of just fluffs it off and hopes the Americans deal with this?
I'd say there's a bit of that. I still think it's a joint operation, a lot of these bases and where these incidents occurred. So there's got to be as much work or close to as much work done by the UK side of things. Right. I mean, you have to look at, I think it was, I may be wrong here, but I think in 2023, maybe 2024, when Sean Kirkpatrick, they held a Five Eyes meeting. I know that there was 2 people from the UK involved with that meeting. We don't know who. We assume it's Defense Intelligence, but we don't get that information. So there are people working on it. It's just really difficult, and all we can do is really speculate about it. And I struggle with speculation, because I think it muddies the waters a bit, because people will pick up on that speculation, and as it sort of goes around, it becomes fact to some people.
It becomes a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I really struggle with that. So it's difficult. It's a really difficult thing when looking at the UK side of things. That's hence why my majority of the work I've ever done has always been kind of US UFO centric. So
Well said, Michael.
So you've been doing this for like over a decade, right?
yeah,
The subject. When I walked into it, one of the first things that I set out to try to do, and I thought I could do this like fairly quickly, was to figure out the landscape of possible theories about what the hell is going on with this UFO thing. And I thought, maybe a month of research and I'll figure that out. And I'm still trying to figure it out and still trying to figure out what I think. You go in and immediately the extraterrestrial hypothesis is like the main thing that kind of everybody knows about. But after a while, you realize there's all these little tendrils that go out into different areas and different other kinds of theories. How has your thinking about it evolved? Is there a place in that landscape where you find yourself kind of leaning towards, or has it been one leaning at one point and then you've kind of shifted the way you think over time? Can you talk about that?
yeah, absolutely. I think I started off how you said there. It all sort of starts off with aliens and the extraterrestrial hypothesis that these are coming from the vastness of space over really large distances. Very quickly, that's began to evolve when you start looking at the other theories that we know, the interdimensional, the ultra terrestrial, the crypto terrestrial, and you could probably keep going. And I kind of flip flop between the possibilities a lot these days, depending on cases I'm looking into or individuals I speak to. But I think ultimately, in the back of my mind, I think that it could well be not only a combination of some of those things, but also something that we probably would struggle to comprehend if we were to find out the actual truth. And so I keep everything on the proverbial table in front of me and shuffle it around here and there at the moment. I think that's the best I can do without, I'm not one to say, right, I definitely think it's this, because unfortunately in this subject, you do get a lot of people who they'll land on a theory and they will stick with it. And I struggle with that.
Same. I think that I lean towards that thing that you identified, where probably if we could find out all the truth, it would be something we don't have a concept for, really. Like maybe if I could grab whatever's inside a UAP and talk to it and ask it, like, are you an alien or are you they'd be like, kind of an alien, kind of a ghost, kind of like maybe a witch. Like, I don't know, you guys don't really have the concepts. Right. But,
Yeah.
I waffle, not exactly waffle, but I'm constantly morphing, leaning the way that you are too. It's good to know other people in that same space doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we always look at everything from a human perspective, so we anthropomorphize everything. But how do you step out of that and look at it from different eyes of a different being or entity that you know nothing about? It's almost just such a gray area.
That's a pun. That's a pun right there.
And
Katie, go ahead.
So you do a good job at kind of keeping up with current, which seems to be we're just being thrown things daily now. We're just a parade of, I hate using the word whistleblowers, but a parade of people coming out and speaking about their experiences. Can you speak, though, to the importance of historical cases and history? And is there a place for that in the current landscape of, this daily entourage of things? Where does historical cases fall into that? Do you think that's important?
I think it's vital. I think that's a brilliant question. I wish more people would kind of consider that as well, because, we do have a lot of information coming a lot these days, especially in the last few years. But we do still have it in sort of waves, and there are quiet periods. And I've always say to people, instead of sitting on Twitter or X arguing about, things, I say use that downtime to go and research historical cases, because you will see so many similarities between what's happened in the past and what's happening now. It does paint a bigger picture of the overall whole story, let's say, of the UFO subject. And so, yeah, I think it's vital. It's absolutely important. Some of the best researchers that I know personally spend a lot of time on the historical cases, and it's incredible what's out there, especially in a lot of the archives. The information's there. There is so much. I would call it evidence as well. People say there's no evidence for this stuff. There is evidence for this stuff. You just have to get off your butt and go and find it.
Do you have an example of a famous or not so famous historical case that really kind of, in those moments of maybe everybody has those moments of doubt that go, no, but that case is so great. What is that case for you?
I'd say the one that sticks out and has done for the last year or two is the 1956 Bentwaters Lakenheath case. So again,
Ooh,
Bentwaters the
about
same
that.
as 1980. Lakenheath, we had the drone thing back in November, but in 1956 there were these pilots were going up doing. I think they were training exercises above Lakenheath, and they were in their fighter jets, and these objects had been caught on radar coming from kind of mainland Europe direction, traveling at multiples of thousands of miles an hour. These were picked up on multiple radars. And then when they were above Lakenheath, they sent the jets up. These pilots were intercepting them or trying to. These objects were in front of the aircraft and they were whipping round, and suddenly they were behind the aircraft. You had people on the ground witnessing it. You had the radar in the aircraft. So we had all of that information. And then good friend of mine, Dr. David Clark, actually interviewed some of the people involved in that case about 20 years ago. So we've got the testimony as well. So we've got radar testimony. It's just such a good case. And I mentioned earlier about how you can cross-correlate between Project Blue Book cases and UK files. This was actually a joint base. So it was in the Project Blue Book cases, but it was in I think it was 701 cases that they could not resolve, that kind of got brushed aside, and it fits into there. So it's one of my favorite cases.
Wow. I had never heard of that.
Neither.
It's amazing how many people have probably had these incidences in the military and they've died and we'll never know their story, right? Or astronauts for that reason. So let's talk a bit about the whistleblowers and being, I think personally, it's my personal opinion, not Vinnie's, Katie's, or Michael's, but we're being too inundated with UAP related things, not only on the discovery of the military aspects, the whistleblowers coming forward. And one of the things Michael mentioned before we start recording is about everything's always about militarizing and the threat narrative of UAPs. And now we have this psionic aspect of people. It's all about love and rainbows and unicorns. And you're like, well, it's got to be somewhere in between. It can be both. So this question is actually to all three of you. And Katie, I'll start with you first. I know, not to put you on the spot or anything, but what's your thought on what is happening? Because as a researcher, as somebody who works in the archives and all that, like it's decades or almost like 5 years in between major cases. And now it sounds like we're just hearing all about this at the same time. And it's hard to investigate thoroughly these new whistleblowers and make sure that their accounts are true. So how do you personally discern what's true, what's not, and digest this information?
Yeah. Well, I think more importantly we each all have our own way we come into the phenomenon and our own, glasses and perspective. And from my perspective, researching what I have on the ranch means, I know there was a government, probably MK Ultra kind of presence out there, CIA. So for me, I tend to sit on the sidelines and I have more of a skeptical view on what the end game is. I mean, what is the narrative? And I try not to make a judgment either way. But I do look at it more of I'm not trusting of what's being thrown at us. Not fully. I don't drink the Kool-Aid.
But did you buy the sneakers? That's the important part.
Yeah, but to be fair, I think it's a good thing. Like we're having the discussion. I love that these people are coming out and talking. It's kind of opening the floodgates. So don't get me wrong. I think it's a good thing that more and more people, but it does muddy the waters and there's so much coming at us. That's why I selfishly asked that question to Vinnie because I wanted to hear for myself because there's so many days that I'm, going over documents and in the archives and I'm like, why am I doing this when the current landscape of this is just changing day to day to day and I'm stuck 40 50 60 years in the past. But to me it feels important, so I was happy to hear Vinnie to say that yes, it's still important. But I think it's good to just sit back and listen and hear everybody out, and I just wait to kind of see where it's going. I have no idea where this is going, but
yeah,
I hope.
And at least when you three say something, I will give you full attention. You have books. Most people that critic on X have no books. They just watch documentaries and their opinions is that of Joe Rogan's. Let's go with you, Vinnie, next. How do you discern or how do you handle this influx of information?
I think if you look, especially in the last sort of 5 to 7 years, how it's kind of changed and morphed. I think you mentioned there the threat narrative. I think in reality, I think that was the only way it was going to be brought out of the fringes into that mainstream, and certainly to get the attention of the government to start looking into this, and Congress as well. You know, if you bring it in under the realm of national security, it's going to start being taken seriously. I think that probably was the only way. I can't think of another way that would have been better to kind of bring it into the position that it's in now, where we've had so many congressional hearings and we've had so many figures within government talking about this seriously, and actually, you know, backing up a lot of what the UFO community is saying. So that for me is kind of, I'm okay with that. As far as like trust and belief and things like that, I'm cautious. You know, I do have a lot of people I speak to privately, and again, I don't just blindly believe what they tell me, but I get to see documents and things and small snippets of information, which do help me navigate to a degree when things happen and when things come out. But again, you know, and I always say, I'm always happy to be proven wrong about something. I have no problem holding my hands up and saying, wow, I got pulled down the wrong rabbit hole. And, you know, it's almost inevitable sometimes anyway. But yeah, I mean, that's how I see it.
You know, and Michael, we'll get to your answer here too, but I was just going to reply to what you said is I think because you're humble and because you have no expectation of grandiose plans, that's why it's working for you. That's why your platform is so good, because people like you. And if you mess up, people don't hold that against you because they know you're honest and that you'll just be open about it. I think when people come in with egos and they're like, oh, it's like this, I think they get shut down really fast. They have a good start, but they fizzle out because people catch them, you know, their egos, and they start fighting with people really fast. I still fight with people on X. I'm not excluding myself from these idiots. I'm an idiot myself. So, Michael, what do you think about this influx of information coming forward?
So I came into this subject from a totally different world than most people. I was a philosopher before this, and one of the skills that you have to hone as a philosopher is the ability to consider lots of conflicting, equally apparently good arguments for a position at the same time. You know, whatever you're working on, there's 20 different people who are all making really good arguments that are all totally different. And you have to acquire the skill of sort of taking every piece of evidence or every good argument or good line of reasoning and sticking it on a shelf in your mind and being able to see all of them at once and not have to commit to any of it. But just to admit, well, there's this case, and then there's this argument that you can make in this way, and then there's this piece of counter evidence, and there's this view, and so on and so forth. That helped me, I think, coming into the UAP field, because there's so much information, at least at this point. It's a constant torrent. There's so many different conflicting views and claims being made, and it's easy if you don't do this thing of sort of setting everything out and saying, I don't have to commit. I'm just going to see the lay of the land right now and what is being said. It's easy if you can't do that to say, well, it's all just bullshit. It's just a big, you know, Niagara Falls of bullshit, and I just want to get away from it, right? But my position so far, and it seems to be holding fairly well, is that probably I'm not probably, but almost certainly some portion of the information that comes out is going to turn out to be false. It's going to turn out to either be hoax or a misunderstanding or fabrication or something, disinformation or whatever. But if you consider the cumulative sum of the evidence, it's really, really hard for me to say there's nothing there. It's really, really hard for me to say it's all just aliens and spaceships, or it's all just, you know, American technology that people are testing or whatever, or it's equally hard for me to say, well, all the whistleblowers are just mistaken or disinformation agents. I think maybe some of them are, but it doesn't really matter that much which particular ones are or aren't when some of the evidence kind of leans towards this direction. And one of the things that I think that the cumulative evidence suggests is that there is some degree to which consciousness plays a role in this larger phenomena. So when people come out and they say, well, we've got psionics, whatever, that sounds like a very sci-fi word to me. But what the thing they're describing is people who can sort of consciously connect with these things. That seems to jive with a lot of the other evidence that comes out in when you look at people's testimony about encounters with these objects or beings or something. They can speak telepathically to them or something. So it all kind of holds together in a way that makes me not have to worry about whether any particular video of an egg against a green background is fake or not. That just doesn't, I don't really care, because I'm looking at the cumulative weight rather than any particular thing. So that also helps me not have to spend any time on UAP Twitter, which I think will just rot your brain and discourage you.
It's like a bad acid trip. It's just too much. You're like, freaking out. It's crazy. Michael, it's your question up next.
So you kind of lean in this direction of like, there's maybe lots of different things going on, lots of different phenomena, different aspects to it, or maybe we don't have the right concepts for it or something. But you still consider yourself like a UFO or UAP person. A thing that I struggle with, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, is why we draw this line around UAP when it seems like there's so many related and equally well evidenced strange phenomena for cryptids or for ESP or whatever the hell it is, witchcraft or something. Why do we kind of stick with this framework of UAP? And is there a danger in that? Maybe should we just like blow that whole framework and say we're just interested in anomalous, weird things? Or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that I consider myself a UFO UAP researcher because ultimately I think that's where I started looking at this thing from a very nuts and bolts perspective. Over the years, I've certainly expanded my mind into what else could be connected to it and all things like that, as you kind of mentioned. I think semantics, I tend not to worry too much about them these days, about what it is. There is these possibilities that everything you mentioned there is somehow connected. Maybe some of it is, some of it isn't. So, yeah, I don't tend to. I suppose as well, if I was to start looking into cryptids and the paranormal as well, I simply wouldn't have enough time to really dig in deep, because if I'm looking at everything from a bigger, broad perspective, then it doesn't allow me the time to really then sort of focus in on one thing at a time and learn sort of a bit deeper, which is what I like to do. So I think that's what it comes down to for me.
Nice. Katie.
So what can the average person do to help push disclosure, transparency, kind of fight for the truth? What can we do as individuals to help move this movement forward? And I guess a lot of this tone here in this is sort of this distrust or this overwhelming Niagara Falls of information. How do we navigate that in this world that we're in right now?
I think it's important when we're talking about things, especially with everything in the media in the US is very government centric. I think one thing a mistake that I see a lot is that people vilify things like the government, like it's this one entity that is holding this secret, when in reality, I think if anything, it's a very, very small faction within or on the fringes of government in some real gray area. The same with all the sort of agencies and the military branches. You can't just vilify them all under one umbrella. Again, it's just going to be a few individuals. So I see that as an issue. I think we need to stop doing that. But as far as what the average person can do, I think just having the conversation and having an open mind, speaking with friends and family, because one thing I've learned is, everyday people that may not have a particular interest in this subject still find it very interesting. I've sat in the schoolyard when I'm picking up or dropping my daughter off at school, and people will just kind of come over and sort of ask me about things. Like, they're really intrigued. So I think just allowing the conversation to expand outside of our little world into the sort of everyday people will only help in the long run. And that in turn will help reduce stigma, because people might then see stories in newspapers and on the news and stuff. And it all just helps kind of perpetuate more seriousness when it comes to the subject.
That's a great answer, Vinnie. Thank you. I needed that reminder. I'm guilty of that as well, of putting everybody in this big basket. So thanks for the reminder on that one.
He's good, isn't he? He's good.
Yeah.
I was with UAP studies, we try to encourage people to study as much as they can on their own, even if they listen to the podcast. Don't take our words for it. Don't take the guest words for it. Study on your own. So, how does Vinnie Adams study this phenomenon? Like, how do you go about, picking your books at, your favorite used bookstore to what you want to actually focus your attention on? Because let's face it, there's so much to this that you could go, like you mentioned, abroad and not really deep delve into it. So how do you study, and what are your top two things you love to study about?
It's a really, really good question. I think in this day and age, I don't do as much research as I used to because I've got so many other things like the show and other things to do. But when I do, I'll initially see what I can find online. Let's say I find a case and I'll look what's online in archives and things like that, or people that have written about it, historically, and just trying to collate all that information. But then before I then sort of analyze it and look through it, I've got a great network of friends that I've made now in the last few years. So I will reach out to everyone and anyone that may have something as well. And it all starts, to give me that big foundation to then start looking into a case. Which, it takes a lot of time. So I'm not saying everyone should do that, but that's kind of how I do things. Yeah. Other than that, yeah, books. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good UFO book, and I have probably a stack of 20 to 30 that I've not even touched yet. I like having the information close to hand if I do need it. So yeah. Again, I wouldn't expect everyone to go out there and just suddenly drop hundreds of dollars on a whole load of books, but ask people. I think if anybody's curious and they want to know, I want to learn about this aspect of the phenomenon, then again, reach out to people. People reach out to me on social media all the time, and I'm always happy to respond and give advice or anything I can to kind of point them in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually good advice. And as far as books, the more you read, the more knowledge you have. And for me personally, because I read a lot, my bullshit meter starts increasing. You start kind of like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't add up because I know this and this and this. And then the only way to really do that is to read. I think that a lot of people these days, they'll listen to podcasts and then they form their opinion based on what they listen to, which I think is not a good thing. Researchers are a little bit more humble. Guys like Stanton Friedman that were actually out in the field. Katie Page, for instance, is an author that she's constantly in the field, constantly doing research, as opposed to, let's say, me who just reads books. But what I'm saying is read books. That's really important, especially in this subject, because a book will delve a lot more deeper into cases. Obviously, there's many books that come to mind, but the idea is to educate yourself on what has been to what is happening now. And there's no difference. It's the same phenomenon. It was the same amount of activity. And Katie, you've been at the archives. You could imprison a person for eternity based on all the information that are at these archives, right?
That's true.
It's a reality of our situation. So thank you for answering that, actually, Vinny, because and just sneaking one more, just about when you do your research for the guests, how do you come up with the questions that are sort of different, out of the box, that they haven't been asked before?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Really is. Obviously, I listen to as much as I can, when I can, because I like to absorb as much information and be aware of what has been said previously. Again, I try to talk on the latest subjects if it's relevant to the guest, just to get their opinion. If it's been asked before, I'll try and either expand on what's been asked of them before, or kind of come at it from a slightly different angle or direction. But I also like to mix in, historic stuff if I can. Again, if it's relevant to that person. I'm speaking with Lou again tomorrow, and he's just done a load of interviews in the last couple of weeks, and so I don't just want to, him to parrot off everything that he said already. So I remember go back to some of my first interviews with him back when I started. There were questions that he couldn't really answer then that I think I'm going to go back to and try and put it at him from a different angle to see if I can get a little bit more, because, I'm aware he's under his DOP, so there's so much he can and can't say. But I like to try and pull those breadcrumbs out of people as well, just to give us that little extra something.
Michael, you're up next, my man.
Talk about fiction. Do you have fiction that really inspires the way that you think about this, or that has made a profound impact on your passion for this subject? Film or novels or anything like that?
I don't I don't tend to consume that much
Really?
fiction in general these days. I don't have the time. I do like a good movie, of course. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to we were talking earlier, and we were mentioning Close Encounters of the Third Kind, things like that. I think unfortunately Hollywood and the movie industry has really struggled to replicate the quality of the kind of movies that we had many years ago.
Good point. Yeah.
I really struggle with that. We've had good movies related to this subject. Look at things like Arrival. I thought that was really clever when it comes to the language and things like that. So, it doesn't really influence or the way I look at the subject really, but it does kind of it opens questions up, like what if it was like that, and things like that. So yeah, books, I don't have time to read fiction books, unfortunately. I'm sure there's a plethora of great ones out there. I just don't have the time.
What an impoverished life. Yeah, I've got to. No, I understand. I understand the crunch of time, but fiction, I think, sometimes is a venue for exploring ideas that you can't do as easily or as naturally in nonfiction. And so, some fiction, I think, really can make profound, equally interesting statements about a subject as nonfiction might, but it's definitely more work, I think, sometimes to find those books. So I understand the time crunch.
Yeah, I mean, just something that comes to mind is the three body problem. We obviously recently had the Netflix thing, but I watched the Chinese version first, the series that was about 30 episodes. But I also read the first book prior to that. That was my first, and so that opened up a lot of questions for me on the way that they portrayed the subject. So I do still try and get a little bits in, and it's good when you find something that is a completely new theory or new angle.
And maybe that's the value, is that really good fiction can break the assumptions that you didn't know you were already having. Like reading Chinese fiction about Chinese sci-fi is fantastic lately, and they have such a different paradigm of thinking about economics and meaning and morality and all religion and all of those things that it can kind of shake you out of your own. Yeah, well, the two things that he's mentioned, Arrival and Three Body Problem, Ted Chiang is Chinese heritage, and Xijin Liu is, isn't that the Three Body Problems author? I think it's Xijin Liu. I know it's a Chinese person either way. So yeah, China's got a lot of really interesting fiction coming in.
I think in the Arrival, they should have got coffee drinkers to interpret the reading, because it's literally coffee stains. That's what I thought of the whole time. I'm like, they're coffee stains. That's how she got the idea for the writing.
Being trolled by.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point too, Michael, about science fiction becomes science fact at one point. Now we're dealing with artificial intelligence. Isaac Asimov's 3 robot rules come into play. And you're like, well, he wasn't that far off. He actually thought about this very thoroughly, because that's the only way for it to protect us would be those 3 robotic laws. So, kudos to him. And he was a scientist as well. And, he was brilliant at what he really gave those 3 robot rules a lot of thought. And it makes sense. I think AI should be applied to that as well. Katie, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Vinny, about so we know historically a lot of kind of the scientific nuts and bolts people that are so important, by the way, into helping figure out what's going on here anyway. But eventually they kind of get into this more spiritual realm, right? Like we talked about the CE5 and calling them in. I'm curious, do you practice any form of meditation, or have you attempted to do that? Or have you tried any of those things?
I haven't, no. One thing in the last few years, it's really enabled me to break away from that nuts and bolts kind of origin that I came from, because I feel like I was kind of looking in one direction. So I've really kind of opened my aperture up to all these other things that have come in. And, I've been following the work of Stephen Greer for as long as I can remember now. But I've always been kind of cautious about attempting these kind of things, because you do hear people say, people have had negative experiences, and I wouldn't want to go into this completely like, I'm just going to call in a UFO and expect it to be, oh, look, there's a craft. Amazing. I've had a sighting. I think, it's probably a lot more to it than that. And I think I need to be a bit more cautious about that kind of thing. and maybe learn a bit more from people who maybe have been doing it for longer, or look into, the groups from the past. You've got Mission Rama from the 70s, who were big on this kind of thing. And I know there were some great researchers in our community who have looked into stuff like that. So if I was to suddenly think, well, maybe I should try it or look into it, I would go and speak to a lot of people first and kind of build up some knowledge before just trying to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very wise. You got to be careful what you ask for sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, we really, at the end of the day, people will call them spirit guides or ghosts or aliens, or we don't know what we're dealing with. And there could be a trickster element too. There's been books written about that. So that's wise. That's a wise thing to do. Good
Also,
answer.
it's a manifestation. Like if, spirituality is involved in this somehow, and it appears to be, but if you're inviting whatever to show up, you're literally inviting whatever to show up. And you have, it's like rolling the dice. You have no idea if they're benign, nice, or completely evil. So I think that may have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, just to jump in, has anybody here seen the movie Nosferatu yet?
Yes, I have.
Not yet, not the new one.
First of all, it's fantastic.
Christmas Day, baby. I was there Christmas Day. Yeah.
Well, one of the sort of tragic mistake that the movie begins with, and I'm not really giving anything away, it's like the very first scene of the movie, is a girl who's in a really bad place, and she just calls out and says, "Is anything there? Will anything come and help me?" And something hears, right? And when I think of CE5, it seems very similar. Like, there are lots of very old spiritual traditions that have really rich practices of calling in, other minds or other beings to interact with them, and they're like rituals of protection and things that they do. It's much more built out. And then when I look at CE5, it seems like it brands itself as if this is new technology, new spiritual technology for contacting UFOs, but it's really not. It's just a very pared down one little component of something that's existed for a really long time. And if there's anything to it, there certainly must be some danger in abstracting that one little ritual, which is exactly what it is. It's a ritual practice, whether they want to call it that or not, abstracting that one ritual and teaching it to people and not teaching any of the other things that attach to it in these traditions where it was really developed. And I imagine lots of those spiritual traditions would look at CE5 and say, you're just going to call in anything. You're just going to, like, whoever wants to come over and come down from the sky and fuck with me, do it. That seems crazy. So I totally agree with.
And we know people that's backfired on them. Katie and I interviewed a gentleman. Oh, well, actually, Vinnie, you know him, Digby Furno. He invited them in, and he regrets it. Same with Earl Grey Anderson. He invited them in. He regretted it because now it included his wife. Like, it was just a whole thing. So I think it's a bad idea, and I try not to focus on it. The thing is with me is I scare myself out of thinking about it. Like at 1:30 a.m., I'm watching abduction stories on YouTube, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. Like, if I was planning on sleeping tonight, that's not going to happen now, right? Reading communion at like midnight, like, I'm an idiot. But I think inviting that, or even the field that we are in, I think, Vinny, you're so inundated in this now that you might start having more experiences and seeing things more, or weird occurrences, because you're constantly thinking about that. And I do believe, energy of what our thoughts, we can manifest things or maybe see things a little bit differently. It's all about a wavelength.
I used to think that was such bullshit. I used to be so allergic to those thoughts.
Yeah.
And now it seems so obvious to me that there's some
it's weird how that works, isn't it?
You have
messed up
interacting with it. Vinny, have you had experiences that you feel like maybe aren't UAP experiences, but that are strange in some way that you find interesting? Or are you willing to talk about that aspect of your life if it exists?
Yeah, I mean, I've had sightings over the years, but I've always been very quick to figure them out, to have a real, prosaic explanation. I think the only thing that remains anomalous that I witnessed was back in 2022 in my first trip to Colombia, where we were investigating this light phenomena that appeared on these mountains and had been reported for hundreds of years by sort of indigenous people. So, I was lucky enough to witness this plasma kind of light appear on this peak of this mountain. And it was quite quite a moment, and I've still to this day I haven't processed it properly because I just don't know what it was. I spoke to so many locals over a couple of weeks about what they thought it was, and it ranged from UFOs to ancestor spirits and earth lights and all of these different things. And I do know that what I saw was strange because of the way the light was this self-contained plasma kind of thing, and we captured it in high definition on video, but there was something about seeing it with your own eyes that almost was different to what you could see on the video. That remains the only kind of thing.
Did it seem intelligent or minded? Sorry, Katie.
It did, because it was moving and it had like small kind of orbs almost coming off of it at times, and that could just be me interpreting like it's intelligent. I'm cautious to say, yeah, definitely. There was something about it that was unusual and very strange, and not like something I'd really considered before.
I was just going to piggyback on that and ask you, what about like coincidences and things like that? Have they increased since you've been involved in this topic?
I'd say synchronicities absolutely happen all the time. I can't really think of any. It's just strange little things that make me stop for just a second and go, okay, that was strange. Just thoughts of something and then something happens afterwards. Just small things that are related that normally would be just coincidence, but the frequency has increased. I start to become aware of them a bit more.
Yeah, it's weird. And with Katie, I was going to say with like the Skinwalker Ranch, because you're investigating, a bunch of people that investigated. Do you think, because we're talking about the CE5, but do you think going there, wanting an experience is kind of like similar to CE5? You're welcoming whatever's there to interact with you, and that's why you have the hitchhiker effect.
Very much so. Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is scary. And I think it attaches to certain people. That's why I was asking Vinny those questions, because, if he's not practicing the meditation and the disassociation, I mean, this is talked about a lot right now, on different podcasts, and that our intention, our expectations, it can open the floodgates to that. And Vinny is wise in not kind of inviting that in, because again, we don't know what or who or what the point is that's attaching to the people. So
yeah, it's weird, but I'm starting to believe in that a lot more. There's a quote by, I think it was Deepak Chopra, if I said that correctly, but what I loved about it, he said, religion is believing somebody else's experience. Spirituality is experiencing it for yourself. And I love that. And I think that's the thing when somebody says, well, I don't believe in UFOs, I don't believe in aliens. It's like, no, you haven't experienced them. There's a big difference in that. And it's not a religious aspect. It has nothing to do with it. It's an actual physical manifestation, spiritual manifestation, mental. It seems to occupy all three, spirituality, mentality, and physicality, like the triad, like you mentioned, the three, or the 33, like it's always appearing, which is amazing. I think we got time for a round of questions each here. And what I was going to actually, for me, my question is, you're attending Contact in a Desert this year, which is amazing. I know you've been trying to get out there for years, but this year they invited you as a speaker, as a guest, and you're doing a live podcast there as well, I'm thinking, right?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I'll be doing a live podcast. I think when it comes to the speaking, we haven't quite figured out exactly what I'll be doing, but I think we've thrown some ideas around whether I'll be introducing some of the speakers, and maybe chairing a panel discussion with some of the others there. So yeah, we're still figuring that out. But yeah, I mean, Contact in the Desert, in my early years of researching, they were some of the lectures and stuff and the talks that I would listen to, because I was aware, it was such a huge event and that. So to come full circle and be invited to attend is just, it's a dream come true. It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It blows your mind.
Get a meet person. Yay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Katie's a speaker there. She's an amazing, and she's always on panels. So most likely you guys will end up on the same panel as well. And all three of us are going to be there this year. So if you guys can make it out to Contact in the Desert this year, it's going to be amazing. I think James Fox has also been announced, and The lady from the telepathy tapes is gonna it's gonna be
Oh, awesome.
consciousness.
What a great podcast, by the way. Everybody should listen to the telepathy
Yeah.
tapes.
I haven't yet, but I keep hearing reviews about it, and I'm afraid to start because then I'll just be addicted, right? But I believe we have the power. We're talking about psionics. I think we're all capable of that.
Yeah.
We're all capable of picking up, if you think about it, most of the human language is your body language. It has nothing to do with what's coming out of your mouth. If I was all deadpan like that, I could say whatever I want, but it's gonna creep the shit out of you. You know what I mean? So it's about your
blink. Some of these guys don't blink.
That's what I mean. And yeah, like the Jake Barber interview, I was like, he's not blinking. I was blinking extra for him because my eyes were getting dry just watching him. I'm like, blink.
Oh man.
Yeah. Give me some water. But yeah, so Contact in the Desert, get back. I got sidetracked again. Contact in the Desert is going to be amazing. And having, even podcasters, the fact that you're going to be there from the UK, where I'm coming down from Canada, and Michael's going to be there this year, just be able to interact with everybody. To me, last year was amazing. And I say for everybody that could make it out, because I literally had the time of my life. First, my wedding after. That's how much fun I had. My wedding is second after Contact in the Desert. They're the special days. Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. And I'm so happy you're going to be there because I finally get to meet you in person. We've been, chit-chatting for a while and we follow each other online, but I've never had the pleasure to just hanging out with you, having a beer. And same with Michael. I've never been in the same room as with Michael ever. So it'll just be nice. I think he's actually really short. I think you're about,
4.5 feet tall.
You're faking it. Yeah.
My shins
We
are
need a person. I got to bend down to greet you. But yeah, that's going to be amazing. So Michael, I'm going to shoot it back off to you for your final question, sir.
What are you working on? What should everybody know about that's happening lately?
At the moment, it's just, I'm focusing on the interviews for the YouTube channel. A bit of a slow start in January, a lot of things going on. So, come the start of February, I was like, right, I'm going to really focus now. So I've got a whole bunch of interviews in the next few weeks. Some big names, Lou Elizondo this week, Ross Coulthard this week, Jacques Vallée next week, and then others as well. So really going to focus on that, have a good start to the first quarter of this year. And then I suppose leading up to Contact in the Desert, that's my summer kind of treat at the moment. So yeah, I'm sure we've been saying all through the interview today that things happen all the time. So I think there are still stirrings in the background of potentially more things happening. So I'm almost kind of ready to pounce on what comes next as well.
Awesome. And Katie?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. It's going to be awesome. Michael, too. That's going to be so great. So it's something to look forward to. And I guess it's kind of my question. You've had so many amazing, great guests in the past on your show and coming up. Are you ever going to kind of put all these great things together and do a book or do something like that in the future? Because I think that there's so much to learn from people that just gobble up from all the different perspectives and then, come up with their kind of where they are in that. And I'm hoping that you're thinking about doing something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I get asked that actually all the time, and it's something I've never really considered just off my own back, but people do ask a lot. And I think it is something I would certainly consider doing, but I think that would come a lot further down the line where I really want to take a big pause, look back at the stuff that I've done through this subject and then be able to put it all down into a book, rather than I feel like I'm in the mix of everything, in the middle of things at the moment. And if I was to write a book and release it, it would be outdated very quickly because I'd want to keep adding to it. So I think a memoir or something like that further down the line is where I would kind of put my considerations the most.
Yeah, well, I hope that you do that in the future, because I think we all get to that point where we gobble and do all this, and then there comes a point where you have to give it back. Like, what did you learn? And we all need to benefit from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Vinny, taking a break once in a while is good too. Taking a step back, I should probably do it more often than not. But I was gonna ask you, how many episodes are you at now?
I think I've got something like over 260 videos on my channel. I think I'm getting close to about 250 of them are interviews.
Does it blow your mind that from your first episode to now that you've reached that milestone?
It does, yeah, it does. Because I never really take a second to really think about it, and then on them rare occasions where I do, I'm like, wow, that's pretty good to be that consistent,
Like the first episode that only has 2 plays to like your recent episode that has thousands of downloads. And then you meet somebody who says, yeah, I've listened to your podcast. You're like, what? Like, you've listened to me? Oh my God, I'm embarrassed and, grateful at the same time. So Vinnie Adams, guys, Disclosure Team YouTube channel. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys already know who he is, but if you don't, follow him on Disclosure Team YouTube channel. He's a man after our own hearts. He has the same mindset, teamwork to make the dream work, and it's not about egos. We have enough of that in the community to begin with, and about just doing solid work, asking solid questions, keeping humble, keeping an open mind. Even including Bigfoot, even though some of us don't like Bigfoot, myself included. But this is who we fashion ourselves after, is people like Vinnie, of course, and Jacques Vallée and George Knapp and Katie Page. We just keep humble. And that should be our approach to it, and not state absolutes, as you said, Vinnie. That's very important, because people will hold you to those accountability. They're going to hold you to those words, and then you mess up. So Vinnie, thank you so much for joining us on UAP Studies Podcast, my man. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you at Contact in the Desert.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really great questions. Really enjoyed the conversation. Can't wait to meet you all.